Hey everybody, today we're going to be talking about tatami mats. We'll go over a little bit of the history and the quality and the differences between different brands and different styles. So when I was growing up, I grew up on homemade mats. They were made of foam bought at a hardware store, and my dad took some vinyl he had, wrapped the foam up, laid them down, and that was our tatami. And that's what he had many dojos with. He didn't have the money to buy professional mats, but that's what we trained on. And you know, he was pretty successful, had 3 Olympic competitors raised on homemade mats. So you can work out on anything really, but if you are a professional club or dojo, or you really want to have a proper dojo, you really want to get good tatami. They're the foundation of your dojo. That's where your students will be training, that's where you'll be spending most of your time, and you want to ensure that you get the best product possible. So you're probably wondering, what makes a great mat? What makes a great tatami? Because they all look the same, and we get this every day, that even myself, I have a difficult time telling the difference between one mat and another mat. It's not really the visual. You can tell a Ferrari from a Honda, but in a tatami, they all pretty much look the same. So I'm going to go over a few pointers that you can look at that illustrates what makes the difference between a good one and a bad one. So tatami itself is the surface mat. And now tatami is a kind of misnomer. Tatami, like as I mentioned, is traditionally the mat used in Japan of straw. Tatami today refers to a mat. Basically, most of them are made very similar in very similar fashion. It's how it's constructed and the materials that go into it that make the difference. So they have a core of foam covered in vinyl, and some may or may not have a rubber bottom. So that's the basic construction of it. So if you look at one brand to another brand, they basically look the same. What makes the difference is, first off, if you look at the surface, this is a tatami surface. It has what is made to emulate the traditional tatami. If it's too rough, it's going to give you mat burn. If it's too smooth, you might slip on it. So on this DAX Hatashita Tatami, it's a nice mix of both. You're going to get enough grip without slipping, and it's very rare really to get a mat burn. If you're getting mat burns, well, I think you'll get over it. If you're really into the martial art you're practicing, it's not that often, okay? So the vinyl surface that goes on top of it is thicker than most. So if you buy an inexpensive brand, they'll use thinner vinyl, and the quality of the vinyl will break down on a thinner, on a less expensive brand. So that's the first point. The vinyl itself is very important. It's in the DAX Tatami mat, it's very durable. So the mats that we sell, we've sold these for over 20 years, and they're still in use. I know local clubs that are still using them 20 years later, and they look great, and they're still performing very well. So that's the first thing, the surface. Inside, you'll see the foam. This is a compound recycled material bonded together, and it's attached to the vinyl. Now, the foam is important because we use recycled foam. But what also is important is that the bonding process between the foam and the vinyl is crucial. What happens on the inferior brands is that the bonding process is not good. It essentially starts lifting away. And once that starts happening, you can't do anything with the tatami. The vinyl lifts away from the foam, and you end up with these bubbles. That's horrible. That you can try to inject them with epoxy or try to fix them, but really at the end of the day, there's not much you can do with it. You'll just end up with bubbles all over your mats. So, and take it from us, over the years, we've tried different brands, and that's what happens. We are always in the lookout for a better product. We only sell the best brands here at Hatashita, and we do our research to find what is great. And this mat is great. On the bottom side, you'll see a rubber, basically a non-slip rubber. Where this is superior to other brands is that it's a little bit thicker and it's a little grippier. If you get a less expensive brand, it's not so grippy, meaning it's going to slide around on your floor surface. Usually you want to box in your tatami so they don't move around. But if you're just laying them down, which many people do, some people pick them up every night and lay them down every night, these will stick to your floor because of the superior rubber on the bottom. If you've ever seen a cheap rubber tire, it has a very plasticky feel. If you get a good rubber tire, it's going to have a very rubbery, sticky feel, and this is what we use on these mats. So that's an important part. Now, when you put the whole thing together, you end up with a entirely encased tatami. So it's basically impervious to any moisture, which is important because you don't want it holding moisture. That just causes rot, and that's just bad. The edges are heat sealed, so there's no seams, open seams. And you can, if you look closely at these, you'll see that there is no gap in air, or it's not going to open up. And then the rubber is put on the back, and it's also sealed to it. It's glued to it. So you've got this basically impervious tatami that's going to stick to your floor, and not going to move. And if moisture does get in it, sweat, cleaning, it's not going to penetrate the tatami itself. So this is what we found. If you buy inferior brand, is usually what happens is you have lifting or cracking at the corners here. With the DAX Hatashita Tatami, it doesn't happen. So those are the main points that make up the construction of the tatami. And as I mentioned, that they all look the same, but they all perform differently. So we've sold this mat to, we were the supplier for the Pan Am Games in Toronto. That was a huge event for us. We supplied all the mats for it, for the karate and the judo. And they're very stringent processes to assess the mats. These are IJF approved, so they're good for the International Judo Federation quality. We also sell to the RCMP, the Canadian Border Services, many of the judo organizations across the country, and we've sold to the US Army, we've sold to the US Police Forces, Canadian Armed Forces, the Border Services. So and I mentioned those because they have very stringent policies and procedures to assess the mats, and the DAX Hatashita Tatami has always come out on top. Okay, let's go over the different options for the mats. Generally, the mats come in 1 meter by 2 meter, which is 3'3" by 6'6". So you would take your area, measure it out to the nearest meter, and you can figure out how many tatami you need. It's pretty easy. We do offer 1 by 1 meter, which is 3'3" by 3'3". But if you're building an entire area by 1 meter pieces, it tends to be more it is more seams, and it looks a little bit busier. So most people opt for the 1 meter by 2 meter. It's really the best option. You're lessening your seams, and it has a cleaner look. Now, as far as color goes, there's many different colors. The standard, blue, black, gray, red, green, yellow are pretty much the standard colors. Now, you can get other colors by special order. We have a lot of tatami, literally thousands in stock. So if we don't have what you're looking for, we can order it for you, and we can do a customer order. It takes a little bit longer, but typically we can ship out the next day for their standard colors. So after color, there's also texture. So although tatami, by its nature, is a tatami surface, and by tradition, it's made of straw. Newer mats, a new model is the smooth surface. Now, the smooth surface isn't really like slick smooth as in a wrestling mat. It still has a little bit of grip. So people sometimes refer to this as an MMA mat. BJJ guys who do groundwork, just groundwork, tend towards a smoother mat. But if you're doing multi-purpose, if you're doing judo, karate, taekwondo, BJJ, MMA, whatever, the tatami surface mat is usually the mat of choice. So you've got two textures to pick from. And also we have in the past made different densities, and you'll see sometimes that they have a different density tatami. Ours is 240, which denotes 240 kilograms per square meter for cubic meter of foam. So for example, the RCMP trains on a very hard and thick tatami we supply them. It's at 300 kilograms per cubic meter. Now, the purpose of that is they're simulating combat on the streets. So they wanted a very firm surface, something that's going to give them some impact protection, but they want to get as firm as possible to emulate being on the street or on the sidewalks. So that's their specific need. But most in our experience, what we're selling right now is the 240 is the best option for most. It's good for standing. So if you're a karate club and you just do standing sparring, it gives enough speed and rigidity for your application. If you're doing judo, where you're doing a lot of impact, it's still giving you a good fast surface, but allowing absorption when you're throwing your opponent. If you go to a softer mat, what ends up happening is it's a little bit slower. So you end up with a mat that isn't quite as fast as the 240. So if you went with a softer mat, it would be okay for if you're just doing kids and you wanted something soft and squishier with lots of give to it, but you sacrifice on the speed of movement and the fleet-footedness. So therefore, the 240 density is the best of most for most everybody. And if you needed a little more impact protection, I recommend building a subfloor, which we sell the blocks to create that subfloor for bigger impact, for judo or for big throws. A lot of the professional clubs will build a subfloor over the entire area, and therefore and then by doing that, they can offer any activity. They can offer judo, aikido, jiu-jitsu for groundwork or karate, and you've got a very firm surface that has, the overall area has lots of impact protection. So that's as far as the density of them. What we recommend is the 240, but if you want a custom order, we can get you a harder or softer surface, but it's very rare. It's a very rare application that I would recommend that. Another thing I wanted to go over here is that when you look at a DAX Tatami, it sounds like a simple thing, but it's 1 meter by 2 meter, and it's the tolerance level is very small. It's usually right on 1 meter by 2 meters. And I say this because it's important in that if you buy a less expensive brand or an inferior brand, they might be a couple of millimeters off per mat. And if it's a half a centimeter off, say, on the length, by the time you reach to the end of the mat, and each one is half a centimeter off, cumulatively at the end of the mat, your mat area, you'll have big gaps in your mat. With the DAX Tatami, the tolerance level is very small, and you'll end up with an area with very tight fitting layout without big cracks. And it's an important thing, especially if you're spanning 5, 10 tatami. It makes a difference that by the end you don't want big gaps in between your mats. It's an important thing, but it's an important distinction to make when you're buying a quality mat. It's a bit of an issue when you've spent all this money and you've got a beautiful dojo and you've got big cracks in your mat. Nobody wants that. So those are basically the variables that you have to look at when choosing the mat. If you have any questions, please feel free to give us a call, go to our website, email us, whatever you like. We have a wealth of information here. We've seen it all. Many of our staff members do BJJ, judo, karate, Muay Thai. Everybody on our staff they're not all experts, but they all have lots of experience in the martial arts, and we're here to help you make the decision. There's a lot of things to consider, and it's a big investment, but we are confident that investing in the Hatashita DAX Tatami is really the way to go. You're going to get the best return for your dollar, and at the end of the day, that's what it's all about: performance and return on your dollar.